Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, Bootstrapping Your Web App, presented by technical evangelist Don Wibier. Don will build a small responsive web application by getting a third-party Bootstrap design and incorporating it together with the brand new DevExpress Bootstrap Controls. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Don.
Thanks, Amanda, and welcome everybody. Today we're gonna bootstrap a web application, as Amanda mentioned. Bootstrapping has a couple of different meanings, but in this particular webinar we're going to talk about Bootstrap, the CSS framework. And for all of you who are not really familiar with Bootstrap, maybe you've heard about it, let's do a really quick intro here. So let us start with what is Bootstrap? Well, in one sentence, I mentioned it already. Bootstrap is a responsive CSS positioning framework. And what that means is that suppose you have a website. Well, you all know these days if you want to position elements on your web page, that is done through CSS. In the old days, we had to do it with tables, stuff like that. But with CSS3, we can position it by using style sheets. And Bootstrap is a framework which layouts the global elements on the page, and it takes care of a couple of things like browser quirks, etc. And it makes it easy for us to position our content on a web page. Well, the reason that you're probably joining this webinar is because we recently released our Bootstrap Controls. So why did DevExpress start with Bootstrap altogether? Well, the reason for this is that we already have a huge set of ASP.NET controls, but they are rendered. I mean, we developed these controls like almost a decade ago. And well, I was talking about the old days with positioning with tables, etc. And well, that technology is what we used for those controls. And these days, the HTML, is not really what we want, though we do have tons of functionality in the classic ASP.NET controls. So we decided to take a look at the controls and see if we could create something which renders a bit more cleaner, etc. And this is why we decided to go for Bootstrap. So why did we pick Bootstrap? Well, it is a good framework which works on virtually any device and any browser. So it doesn't matter if you have a small mobile phone screen or you have a big mobile phone screen or an even bigger tablet or a desktop computer. Your page will adjust itself to the dimensions of the device that you're looking on. Bootstrap is also widely adopted by designers and HTML shops. So if you are building a web application but you don't have like a design team in place, or you don't have like the people who can chop up a design into HTML, well, there are people out there that design on Bootstrap, and they can even create a Bootstrap design according to a picture that was designed by a web designer, basically. So it is easy to get somebody in to do that particular job. Well, another thing I pointed that out, it is semantically clean HTML. And we'll dive a bit into the HTML a bit later. And well, this is obviously very nice for search engine optimization. The search engine spiders from Google and the others, they are really liking this kind of HTML because it's compact, there's less to analyze, and they can focus on the content instead of parsing away all the extra HTML tags, etc. Well, there are even a lot of third-party designs available on, for instance, Start Bootstrap or Theme Forest. So you can actually go to one of those sites, and if you see a design that would fit your needs, you can actually buy it for like $10, maybe a bit more, and you can customize it and put your own application in that design. And that's what we're going to do in a minute. Well, and as I mentioned, we have created these controls, DevExpress Bootstrap Controls, and what they are, I mean, technically they are based on top of the classic ASP.NET controls that we have, but we have changed the rendering engine which will produce native Bootstrap compliant HTML. And that means Bootstrap is a CSS positioning framework, so there are a whole bunch of CSS selectors that we can use, and you'll see that the DevExpress controls will use those CSS selectors according to the Bootstrap framework. And as a result, that means that the DevExpress controls will automatically integrate into the design. And for all of you who have used our classic ASP.NET controls as well, specifically the people who worked with our controls together with a designer or somebody who creates the design of the application, you know that it can be quite a pain to style the controls into the design that was delivered. With the DevExpress Bootstrap controls, that will go way easier because we use the CSS that was shipped with the design of the website. Well, yeah, that was a bit of a short introduction on this. So let's get started with some demo stuff. Before I start, I'll show you the design that I picked, and for that, I will switch over to one of the pages that I have already. So I mentioned it in the slide deck. I picked a theme from Start Bootstrap, and even better, these themes are all for free. I mean, if you would go to any other site like Theme Forest, most designs you have to pay some for, but these themes are basically free. And if you go to this site, you'll see a whole bunch of themes here, and the one that I'm going to use, I just clicked obviously the wrong one. Here are a number of free themes, and I will build a small admin panel here. So I'm going to be dealing with this particular design. There is one thing that I do need to point out. If you are going to try to build your own application based on an existing design or a third-party design, it is very important that at this stage there are basically two versions of Bootstrap, and that is very important to remember. The current production version of Bootstrap is version 3. So let me switch over to the Bootstrap homepage, and you'll see that actually. If I go to the homepage here, you'll see that there is version 4 is currently in beta. And it means it's almost finished, but if you want to know for sure that everything is working, you can better go for the version 3 instead. Version 3 is the production version for Bootstrap. The differences between Bootstrap 3 and 4 are there. So that means that there are different CSS selectors, the style sheets look differently, and there are a couple of things which will not be the same. So if you want to go for a third-party design, you have to make sure at current stage that we only have Bootstrap 3 compatible design. And what you see here is that this one is a Bootstrap 4 theme, so this will not work yet with the DevExpress controls. Unfortunately, there is an alternative version, which is the Bootstrap 3 version, and that's the one that I'm going to use. So make sure that you're dealing with Bootstrap 3. I have prepared it already, so if I go one tab further, this is the Bootstrap 3. This is the static HTML version of the page that we'll be working in during the webinar. And there are a couple of things which are interesting to see. So we have a chart here. We have another donut chart here. We've got a list of items here. And we have a transactions panel. Well, this is obviously all Fixie's data. And we have a nice menu on the side. And for all of you who are still a bit in doubt, like, okay, responsive, very nice, but how does that actually work? Well, I can show you that in this design. If I make the browser any smaller, because that's most of the times what's counting, if I make the browser smaller, you'll see that at a certain width, the page is being rearranged. You saw elements swapping, so the donut chart is is right below the area chart, and instead of 4 of those blocks next to each other, they're being trimmed down in 2 by 2 pairs. And this is basically what responsive is all about. In this case, the tasks panel is nicely underneath the donut, and everything is still fitting in a screen which has this dimension. If I make the screen any smaller, then you'll see what's happening. You'll see that the blocks, the colored blocks, are under each other. Everything is still fitting inside the screen real estate. And if I make it even smaller for a phone or something like that, you'll see that the menu disappears here. And the elements that were just on the right side will be swapped to the left side, and we'll have a little hamburger menu to, which gives us access to the site navigation. So this is responsive, and this is what we're going to build. For that, I have prepared a small application, and I've prepared a number of things here. So I'll explain it quickly. What I did is I first started the application by using the DevExpress template gallery, and the easiest way to get started with Bootstrap is by, in this case, I'm going to add a new project here. And by accessing the DevExpress template gallery on the ASP.NET tab, you'll have a Bootstrap web application. And this will give you the standard Bootstrap homepage, basically. What I did next, let me cancel this one because I did it already. So what I did next, I copied all the assets that come with that static SB admin page. I copied them over, so there is a bit of JavaScript here, which is taken directly from the folder which contains the theme. There are some icon fonts here with a number of style sheets. There is the style sheets itself for the design. It's got the Bootstrap CSS, and it's got some custom CSS for this SB admin panel. And a couple of other things. I just copied them in, and the second step I did was basically chop up the index.html into a master page, which is this one. So I copied everything out. I defined the content area here, and the rest, the content area of the static page, I put it in the default one. So this is basically what I prepared already. What I did next, I also prepared a bit of code to feed some data to the site, because I want to have some server generated data. So I created just a little class here with some static data. Well, if you take a look, you'll see that these items correspond with the different elements on the static HTML page. This is just to make the demo working. And after the webinar, you'll have a GitHub link where you can actually clone this entire project. So, and with this in place, well, I've got a small application, but it's looking pretty empty. So let me start it up, and you'll see that we have the basic design here. So we have, yeah, for the webinar, I don't do the colored blocks, so I left them statically in, but I mean, I'll point you in a couple of directions how you can make those dynamic as well. For the rest, everything is empty, so there are no charts because we will be using our own Bootstrap charts, which are basically taken from the DevExpress product line. So you'll have the nice JavaScript client-side charts. I will obviously be demonstrating the use of our Bootstrap grid view, and I'll use the menu that we have for the Bootstrap controls as well. So yeah, this is what we have. So let's get started, and let me get started with the menu first. In this particular site, I will put the site menu in the master page, and what I can do here is if I open up my toolbox and I search for Bootstrap, then there should be an item here which is the Bootstrap menu. So let me enter menu as well. Here we have the menu. What I also did, I defined a couple of data sources already on the page. So I will bind the Bootstrap menu to a sitemap data source. And in this case, the sitemap data source has been declared all the way here. So that means that it will read the web.sitemap file, which I prepared as well. And this will be our menu items. So I will leave the Bootstrap menu ID is for now it's fine. I can now code in the data source ID that was going to be the sitemap data source 1 to be precisely. To make sure that we don't get any errors, let me paste it in here. And now the items will be fed from the web.sitemap file. There are a couple of other things that we need to put in here to get it all working nicely. So I'm going to put in a couple of other things. For instance, we need to tell the menu which fields to use from the nodes in the sitemap file. So I'm going to paste in a couple of attributes here. The data source ID I already added, so I'll remove that one from here. I've specified an icon CSS class field, and then icon CSS class is something which is very common in Bootstrap websites. Instead of using little bitmaps or GIFs or JPEGs, we are now using a vector font which will have all the icons that we want to use. So if I switch back to the static version of this site, we'll have a number of little icons here, and this is a vector font, and we are specifying a particular selector to get like the dashboard or some other icon which is inside that font. I specified the name field as well. At this stage I don't really need it. I obviously specified the navigate URL field and the text field. And with this in place, there are a couple of other things that I need to do. And for this, this is something which is, if you want to go into this approach, you need to get familiar with the web development tools of your browser. Because if I right-click this item and I hit inspect, then we'll see that there are, on this particular area, there are a couple of CSS classes attached to the menu. And in this case, this is the containing div, and we've got an unordered list, which will hold the menu items. And it's got a number of classes specified as well. So to make things work, we have to specify those classes as well on the menu. Well, because we set this control up in the Bootstrap way, we have added a specific section here, which is the CSS classes section. And here we have a control attribute or property, which will be the containing div of the menu, just as you saw in the web development tools. And we also need the selectors for the menu, which is the unordered list. And I can now just copy those selectors out of the original HTML, which is what I'm doing right now, and put them in there. And then the menu will be rendered accordingly to the original design. So with this in place, we have inserted the menu, and we can now feed the menu server side, which is in most scenarios what we want. And if I will now start up the application again, you'll see that we have this menu, and it looks exactly the same, including the icons like the original one. I didn't need to change anything on colors, highlighted colors, etc. because this is a Bootstrap menu. It will take over all the styling from the Bootstrap theme that we are working with. So, and to make sure that it is being dynamically created, let me remove this one from the XML. So you'll see that I'm not tricking you around. If I remove this one, the forms 2.1, and I hit Control Save, then you'll see that it's gone. So this is a menu, a Bootstrap menu generated on the server and populated the Bootstrap way. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is let's put in the chart. In this particular scenario, so I've also changed the title, by the way, to DX Bootstrap Admin Panel, so you can actually see on which side I'm looking. This is the DX Bootstrap Admin Panel, and the SB Admin right here is the static version. You see a nice grid here. If I reload the page, I'm not sure if you can actually see it because of the webinar software. Well, I mean, it is the chart is being animated, but it's quite slow, and I mean, it will display the stuff that it needs to display, but I can tell you we do a better job with our charts. So let's use the Bootstrap chart that we have in the toolkit and head over to Visual Studio again. And this will be something on the master on the default page. So let's find the place where we can actually insert it. Let me scroll down a bit. The area chart. I put a bit of a comment in here for myself so I can find it quickly. This area chart is going to be a Bootstrap chart. And I'm going to drag it in here. So here is the chart. There are, again, a couple of things that we need to do. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to feed it with data. And as I mentioned, this chart is taken from the DevExpress control set, which is full client-side JavaScript. So that means we need to feed that data, but we want to have it from the server loaded into the client. And there are a couple of things on how you can do it. You can define a server-side data source, But there is also another way of doing it, and that's the one that I'm going to be using by specifying a URL which will feed the data right into the chart. And that is something that's a file, in this case a static file, that I have prepared as well. It's just some JSON data. It's actually the same data that was used in the static version, but this will serve the chart, the area chart. I'm gonna go over to split screen, and you'll have to, I mean, the Visual Studio Designer doesn't do a really good job on this responsive web, so don't bother too much that it isn't looking great. The only reason I am using the designer is because I want to have access to the design time features that we ship with the charts. So in this case, I can either pick a data source or I can pick a data source URL. And by clicking this, I can go to my JavaScript folder and select this data. So now this data will be fed into the chart. Further, I need to use the aggregation feature, and I can now use the designer to define a number of series. And to get like the same kind of chart that was in the original design, I need to insert 3 series of the type chart spline area series. So that will be this one. And let me add another one. And a third one. Yeah, this one was it. And now we need to specify a number of properties here. So we need to specify for each series, we need to specify an argument field, which is one of the properties out of the JSON file in this case, and that will be the period property. Then we need to specify a value field, and for the first one it's going to be iPhone, and to make it look a bit nicer I can specify a name as well. So this is going to be iPhone. Same goes for the second series. It's going to be a period. On the argument field it's going to be an iPad on the value field, and I'm going to name it iPad. And the third one, again, it's going to be the period one. In this case, it's going to be the iTouch, and its name is going to be an iPod Touch. Just like this. Well, we've now set up the chart, so if we're going to boot up the application again, let's see how this chart looks. Wow, here we are. Okay, the only thing I didn't do was color the series in the same colors that were in the original design, but well, you saw the designer, you can fine-tune the chart in any way you like, and you'll get the animations for free. It even has the legend here, but again, you can customize the chart any way you like. And the nice thing is that once I make the screen a bit smaller, you'll see that the chart will be resized as well. You see, so that was pretty easy to set up. And again, yeah, for the series we pick some default colors here, but you can easily change that by using the designer in Visual Studio. So let's see if we can do the donut as well. The donuts is another type of chart. So let me scroll a bit down. I put a comment donut here, and for this I'm going to use the Bootstrap pie chart. Well, a donut is some kind of a pie with a hole in it. Well, so it's going to be a pie chart type. And again, we're going to need to define some series, and we need to bind some data to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is let me synchronize my views, scroll a bit down, and again I also defined a data source URL for the donuts, which is this one. I'll show you in a sec. It's got only just a little bit of data. And we are not dealing with a pie, but I want the hole in it, so let's do the donuts. Let me also open up the designer again to define the series here. This is only one series, and it's going to be a Bootstrap pie chart series. For this, I'm going to fill the argument field in already. It's going to be named label. I'll show you how the data looks in a sec. And the value field is going to be value. And with this in place, I can hit OK and show you the donut data. So this is only it. This is also taken from the original static design. And once we start up the application again, you'll have the area chart, you've got the menu, and if you scroll down a bit, you'll have the donut as well. Again, I didn't do any additional styling on the series colors, but all the functionality is in there. So we have the mouse over, and you can even go over the legend here. And again, if I resize the screen, you'll see that also the donut is fully responsive, and it's looking really nice. So we've already done quite a bit of work here on this particular admin panel. Let's take a look to the task panel. So I'll switch over to the Asp admin page here. It's got a bunch of data in here. What you can see here on the donut chart, by the way, is that it will have text here, and I could use some JavaScript to change the text as well and display the values. I could hide out the legend as well, but that's all customizing the charts. We've got some webinars and some YouTube videos on how to do that. Let's take a look at the task panel. This looks like a list of items. It's got like a bit of a status badge, which is like a typical Bootstrap thing, a badge. And it's got a little icon in front of it. What I personally what I think is a bit not too nice is that the text, which is padded here, is in front of, is right below the icon. It's not like lined with the I from invoice in this case. And also, the badges are not like really aligned. So let's use a grid view for it, a Bootstrap grid view that we have in our Bootstrap toolbox. For this, I did set up that data that I was showing in the beginning of the application. So if I switch over to my application again, I have the data, the sample data class here. And in this case, we were dealing with the tasks. So I've got a bit of a task list here, and I can feed this to the grid. So let's do that. I'll first switch over to the source view. That's a bit more convenient. And well, here's the task panel. I'm going to insert that grid here. I don't see it that quickly, so let me just search for it. Grid view. Well, before doing a bit of quick coding here, let me first change over to the split mode again, so I can use the design time features that we have for the grid as well and choose a data source. The data source I already defined on top of the page. It's an object data source, so I'm going to bind it to tasks. And it's going to put some stuff in here, but I could now go to the designer and make all kinds of changes here. I can do some stuff with the columns, etc. There are a couple of interesting things to point out here, and we can mimic that same behavior exactly. For that, let's switch over to the original static design. And if I right click and inspect this element, there are a couple of things to point out here. We have this icon, we've got the text, and we've got the badge. If you take a look on how this is being constructed in HTML, then you'll see that we have a span with a class badge. It will hold the date or the time, or at least that text. And there is an I selector here which will print out that particular icon. You can see it being highlighted in the preview. And then there is the text, the calendar updated. So if we render out these constructions, it should more or less look the same as what we have on the task panel of the static design. So for that, I'm going to use a couple of custom features in the grid. So let me hit OK here. And well, there is some stuff being rendered, like the columns, etc. But I'm going to change a couple of things, and I will do that manually. So first, I will tell the ID field I don't want to see it. So that's going to be a visible is false. And then I want to have the alert text. And then I want to have the badge type, but the alert text should be on position 2. And the badge type should be on 1. And then we have the badge text, which should be on position 3, just like this. And to make it even better, I will now need to use the data item template to render out the same kind of HTML to, in this case, get that icon. And for this, I will just render out some exact same HTML, which I will just paste in here. So what I do here is I render out that I selector with the appropriate class, and the value here is depending on the badge type property of the data that I'm binding to the grid. The same goes for the last one, because we need to render out that badge class as well to actually have that gray background for that last column. So it's going to be a data item template as well, and I will render out and use the data binder eval construct to get that particular data inside there. And the last thing I will do here is I will do a horizontal align right, so it will be nicely aligned. Then there are a couple of things on the Bootstrap grid that I like to add as well, and that is, for instance, I only want to see horizontal grid lines, and I want to have no column headers. So this is going to be in the settings section. I'm going to render in a number of CSS classes as well. As I mentioned before, with the menu, the grid has that CSS section as well. And if I switch back to the Bootstrap menu, to the static design, you'll see that the panel here has those selectors. That is going to be right here. The last thing I would like to add here is that I don't need a pager on the grid. So we can specify that by using the settings pager. I could use the designer for this as well, but I mean this is pretty straightforward. And then the last thing, well, we don't really need it, but we should generate specify a key field name, and all my sample data have an ID property just like this. So with this in place, let's see if we have, well, you already see some design time features here. So let's see how this looks at runtime. We have a task panel here, and I have to say that I like the alignment a bit better. So basically I've created 3 columns, so everything is looking pretty nice, and if the text would wrap, it would be under the text, not under the icon. But I mean, if you want it the other way, that's up to you, obviously. The last thing, which is pretty much the same, is the transaction panel. For that I added some data as well, and we can put a grid view in there as well. So let me quickly do that as well to make sure that we're having something which looks pretty similar to the rest of the original static design. For this I have some space reserved here, so let me put in the grid again and synchronize the views. So I can now bind this one to another data source that I have defined, which is the orders one. And well, there are a couple of things that I want to have the same as the previous grid. That is going to be the key field name to start with. It's also going to be an ID. And I need the CSS classes section, which is pretty much the same as the other one. Like this. Well, I could use the designer to populate the columns, but I could obviously also specify them by code, and let me just do that. They are pretty much the same as the previous one, so I'm going to paste them in just like this. A couple of things worth mentioning here is that the date and the time which were in the static design, so if I go back to the original design, there is an order date and an order time. That's actually the same field, but well, in C# we have a date time field, so I'm using that field twice, but I'm displaying it differently. And the order amount is being formatted as a currency. And with this, we'll have that last thing as well. And we actually have the transactions panel filled with data as well. The only thing that you shouldn't mind is the formatting. I mean, I am based in Europe, so I will obviously have my computer set to Euro currency, and the date format is slightly different from the United States format, but I mean, that's just a matter of setting the culture. We can now do things, because we are using the DevExpress grid, we can do all the nice things, like I want to sort on time or date or amount. We can even do paging if there were like more items. Everything that you're used to on the grid is just working nice. Then I'm checking my time. I can actually show you one other thing that I would like to show you actually. And I mean, you have seen a couple of controls now, and you have seen how easy it is to incorporate it into an existing design. You'll have all the nice goodies that come with Bootstrap, so it's responsive, etc., and it's really nice. It works pretty much out of the box, and even if I resize my page, you'll see that everything is being aligned. I could even use the adaptive features to hide out columns with particular screen dimensions, etc. But yeah, this is all set up pretty quickly, as you could see. We do have a whole bunch of those Bootstrap controls, but this is our first official Bootstrap controls release. So that means that not all the functions of the existing controls are in there. Not all the controls that we have in the classic ASP.NET controls are already available. And yeah, that could cause some issues. Like you have set up your site for like 80%, and there are like a couple of things that we don't have the controls for yet. So you could try to postpone your release and wait until we have them, because we're going to have a 17.2 release at the end of the year with like a ton of new features, and it's going to be great and awesome. I've seen some features already, and it's going to be cool. But if you can't postpone your release date till the end of the year, then you might need to use a couple of other tricks, and I want to show you one of them. I didn't show it in the static design, but I'm going to show you right now. In the static design, on the right side, on the right top, there is this envelope and this bell. And if you click that one, let me go back to the static design actually. You'll have a nice pop-up with a number of things here. Same here, and actually the same here. In my prepared design, these ones weren't working, as you could see. If I click it, nothing happens. This one, I left it in, but I want to show you how you could create this. Yeah, by in case we don't have that functionality available yet. The way that we can do that is by simply clicking or checking out the static HTML, and what you'll see is that there is this unordered list which will hold. This unordered list will hold the message items in this case, you see? So what we can do to mimic this behavior, or basically create this exact same behavior, is by using a Asp.NET repeater, just a standard one. And if I switch over to my master page, because that's where it was, I can actually put that repeater in here, bind it to a data source that I've already prepared. It's also in the sample data class. But let me finish this one off by saying run at server, giving it an ID, and binding it to my ODS email, just like this. And what we can do now is we can actually mimic the behavior of that, or the HTML that's being rendered. We can create that exactly with by using the Asp.NET repeater. And we can do that by specifying a header template as well as a footer template and an item template. The header template and the footer template will open the unordered list, and it will close it in the footer template. And we can actually then mimic that same behavior. So how would that look? As I mentioned, we have a header template, and this is the exact same code that was taken out of the static design. Let me put in a footer template as well here, and the item template I can just put in here and snipping out one of the elements, and using the eval constructions I can just get the exact same behavior here. So yeah, you can clone this project from GitHub and have a good look at this, and you'll see that this is really exactly the stuff that we want. And if I now build the application and start it up again, I should have copied over that ID, which I didn't obviously. It was the messages. That was the error messages. Couldn't find this one. And well, we've got the site again. And what you see here now is that we have the exact same data, which was taken from the C#, the server-side data. I changed the names a bit, and yeah, this is basically how we can accomplish that behavior. If you want me to finish off, because we are almost at the end of our time, if you want me to finish off that alert button as well, it is basically the same approach. If I paste a repeater in here, I use the header template, which opens up the unordered list. I use the footer template to close it down. And I use the item template to render out all of the individual items here. You will see that we have this one as well as that one. And yeah, so with this, I hope you have a good impression on the power that we give you with our DevExpress Bootstrap Controls, and that you'll see how easy it is to get that all working in an existing design. If you have any issues, or if you find that we are lacking functionality, don't hesitate to send a ticket to our support desk, so we know what you're missing or what is not working correctly, and we can work on that. And with this, I'd like to give it back to Amanda. Amanda, are there any questions?
Hey, Don. No questions have popped up yet, but we can certainly give people a second to get any in. I can talk about what's coming up while we wait.
Yeah. Oh, I do like to point out, it's on the bottom of my thank you slide deck. There is this GitHub URL here. This is where you can get the project that I have been building during the webinar. You can get it right now. You can clone it, play around with it, etc. And yeah, see how it works.
Awesome. Let's see. So we do have a couple webinars lined up. Coming up September 26th, Charting, the return of the native. DevExpress just announced the beta of their charting library for native iOS and Android apps. And in this session, technical evangelist Paul Usher will show how to get the most out of this new DevExpress chart suite on iOS, and debate with CTO Julian Bucknell the issues surrounding good UI on mobile real estate. And then Don is back on October 3rd with an in-depth look at ASP.NET version 17.1. Don will explore some of the new 17.1 features in detail and discover how to apply them in your own web applications. And that webinar will include web forms as well as MVC samples. All right, so we did have a question pop up from Neer. Can I convert existing projects easily, or should I recreate them from scratch?
Well, yeah, to be honest, you probably have to recreate them from scratch, though maybe not entirely. But concerning the UI related things, I mean, the controls, this is exactly why we decided to create an additional set of controls, because it is highly impossible to have like one control render both Bootstrap and other HTML. So yeah, if you have architected your application in a way that your data and your business logic is pretty much separated from your UI, yeah, then you only need to redo the UI. You need to change the UI anyway if you want to change over to Bootstrap, because your HTML will change, your CSS will change. So yeah, you probably need to do a decent amount of work to have your existing application converted into a responsive one. But that doesn't have, yeah, well, it obviously has a bit to do with DevExpress, but it mostly has to do with the changing of the HTML and the CSS altogether, basically.
Okay. Great. And that is all our questions, Don.
Excellent.
All right, everybody. So Don has that final screen up. You can obviously reach him on Twitter. His email is listed there, donw@devexpress.com. And if you have technical questions, you can always contact us at support@devexpress.com as well. Like I mentioned before, today's webinar will be made available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. I posted that link in the chat box. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Don. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.